I was waiting for this game for such a long time, and there are some reasons behind that. King's Bounty 2 is a tactical RPG set in the kingdom of Nostria, but ultimately fails to deliver on its promises of a high fantasy world. Taking command of military troops in a fantastic world full of strange creatures and political strife sounds exciting, offering audiences a chance to escape the dullness of reality and immerse themselves in a captivating story where they are the hero. Unfortunately, King's Bounty 2 falls flat on that promise, only providing bland environments, frustrating combats, and uninteresting chapters, making for a disappointing experience for those expecting a grand adventure. King's Bounty 2, developed by 1C Entertainment and published by Prime Meta, is a tactical RPG in which the player chooses one of the three chapters, each of which has their own distinct adventures, such as magical abilities or leadership skills. The protagonist then commands military troops throughout a campaign that follows the political strife of the Kingdom of Nostria, as the rumored to be sick king begins to hand power over his son. King's Bounty 2 is a mix of third-person exploration and top-down turn-based tactical combat, which is an interesting twist on a genre that is usually focused on level-based battles. The world of Nostria in King's Bounty is beautiful too, and it's easy to see that a lot of time and effort was put into the game's aesthetic. Each tree, stick and flake of snow in the game is full of detail. King's Bounty 2 successfully creates an atmosphere that makes the player feel like they've been transported into a fantasy world like in Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia. However, that's really the best part about the game, and the rest is either bland or worse. Exploring the world itself isn't that much fun, and while the surroundings looks beautiful, it begins to feel more like a vast expanse of distance to travel instead of a world teeming with life and lore. There are side quests and chests to be found throughout Nostria, but these are rather uninteresting, and their only purpose is to gather gold to buy replacement troops after a brutal encounter. And most encounters are brutal, meaning that a majority of the player's time in King's Bounty 2 is spent gathering gold, slogging through side quests and roaming the barren beautiful world instead of progressing through the story, which is meant to feel time sensitive as political tension in the kingdom comes to a head. The battles aren't difficult in a fun way either. It's not that the combat requires an innate ability to strategize, but that the enemy forces are often overwhelming so much so that each encounter feels heavily weighted in the opponent's favor. In addition, the player chapter has a limited number of slots to fill with recruitable troops, meaning that the only solution is to tough it out instead of evening the playing field. Your commander gains experience over time, getting stats that buff up your troops and magical powers to blast enemies. The troops themselves gain experience and come from a customizable roster divided into 4 factions: Order, Anarchy, Power, and Finesse. Those are also the 4 tenets which chapters follow in the game, that powers are divided into, and that quests branches fall into. They're the alignments of King's Bounty, the equivalents of Mass Effect's Paragon and Renegade, and they line up with the story's possible endings. It's a nice touch, but might leave you feeling cold if you would like to be a polite non-anarchic house necromancer, for example. Not that the role-playing is really a highlight, dialogues don't branch, but rather choices are made by picking one of 2 options during the course of a quest. Your dialogue is fixed in fact, so sometimes your chapter will say things you don't really like. That wouldn't be a problem if the chapters were more interesting. Catherine the Mage, for example, is kind of a jerk, where Elise the Paladin is naive to the point of frustration. And even the warrior doesn't have a personality at all. That's not even to mention the writing, which is awful, and the voice acting, which is worse. I switched the game to Russian after 10 hours, which improved the experience considerably. I don't speak Russian, it was just nice to stop the flood of hammy performance. In fact, the game as a whole doesn't really have much personality. That's the big fault. The realistic art style is detailed, but it ends up looking like top-end graphics from 2012, when a bit of stylization would have gone a long way, something those who loved the comical fantasy and fairy tale style of the older King's Bounty games are going to sorely miss. There is fun in the game and a bit of humor, but like the tactical battles, it's overweighted by the boring bits. It's a static word for a reason, though encounters are fixed. As you approach them, a golden ring appears and the enemies for that tactical combat come spilling out of the bushes or whatever to shake their swords at you menacingly. It's hilarious and charming and serves the game mechanics very nicely. When you start the fight, the camera zooms out and the space around you becomes the battlefield, a great touch in tactics game. King's Bounty 2 had the potential to be something special in the tactical RPG genre, but ultimately falls flat. It's especially disappointing because the idea of combining third-person exploration with hex-based strategic combat is incredibly common. And it's clear there was an excellent idea buried in the game somewhere for what the world of Nostria could have been. Unfortunately, that vision didn't quite pan out, leaving King's Bounty 2 a bland, dull slog instead of a deep fantasy.